professor at University of Washington and also visiting professor at our center here. And we are having more and more people joining as I speak. So since the time is already upon us, I would, without any further delay, I would request Professor Abhinandanan, the coordinator of our center at IISc, to please introduce Professor Maresi, and then we move to Professor Maresi Nerad's lecture right away. So over to you, Professor Abhinandanan. Thank you very much. You are on mute, Abhi. You are on mute. You're still on mute.
Yeah, okay. Now it's working. Yeah, thank you, Suresh. My name is Abhinandanan, and I'm the coordinator of the DST Center for Policy Research at IISc. So I'm pleased to welcome you all to this afternoon's webinar in the policy lecture series of our center. And I'm even more delighted to have this honor of introducing today's speaker, Professor Maresi Nerad. Professor Nerad has an MA degree in political science and physical education. That's an interesting combination. And this degree is from the University of Darmstadt in Germany. And she has a PhD in higher education from the University of California, Berkeley. Her research and teaching career in higher education with an almost exclusive focus on doctoral education began at UC Berkeley and continues now at the University of Washington, Seattle, where she is a professor emerita. During this highly illustrious career, Professor Nerad led quite a number of important studies on doctoral education. I just want to highlight two of them today. In the late 1990s, she led a landmark study titled PhDs 10 years later, with funding from the Andrew Mellon Foundation and the National Science Foundation. It also had the endorsement of the Council of Graduate Schools and the American Association of Universities. In this study, Professor Nerad and her team analyzed the results from a large-scale national survey of PhD graduates from American universities about 10 years after they graduated. The survey asked these graduates to essentially retrospectively evaluate their doctoral programs and the usefulness of their PhDs in light of their careers. And that is why this 10-year gap was very important. And a highly cited paper from 2004 titled "The PhD in the US, Criticisms, Facts and Remedies" provides a distillation of the results from this and related projects that she led during her over 30 years of research on doctoral education. The second important facet that I want to highlight is her more recent studies on the role of globalization in doctoral education. Her efforts in this field have culminated in a book that she co-edited, so I'm holding it up here, titled Towards a Global PhD, Forces and Forms in Doctoral Education Worldwide. And of course, I can mention many others, but I just wanted to limit myself to two major facets of her work. The range and reach of her work is quite phenomenal. For example, she has an article titled Taboos in Doctoral Education, in which she has explored the kinds of concerns and issues which are important in a PhD student's life, but end up remaining undiscussed and unaddressed during their PhD years. With a stellar reputation as a major scholar of global repute, it is not surprising that Professor Nerad has found a second home as a visiting professor in many different institutions across the world. We are indeed proud to have her here as at DST CPR at IISc as a visiting professor. During this tenure with us, she is also leading a multi-institution collaborative research on doctoral education in India that we will be participating in. Without any further delay, let me now request Professor Nerad to take the screen and deliver her lecture on challenges and opportunities in research education and training. Over to you, Maresi.
I must say, being here in the center, I always amazed about the engaged and bright fellows here. And I really very much enjoy interacting with them. And also this time it was really a little bit subdued and less of it because of COVID. But what I want to do today, the key message I want to leave you with, is really use this time you have right now as professionals, as postdocs, to the time and the space. Use this very consciously. And I'm saying so, then less than 0.5% of the Indian population have a PhD, and that means from age 25 till 64 who enter the university, less than 0.5% only have a PhD. And if you want around the world, for those who entered once a university, just 1.1%. So you see, you're really a quite select, unique group. And therefore I'm saying this time you have, really the time and space, use it to question the status quo, become intellectual risk takers, and examine the reproduction of inequality and become aware of your role as future leaders after this postdoc and after this training. So really become also aware of yourself. And I will end this talk and my plea to you to develop, and I will define it at the end, a sustainability mindset. So what I do is today is really provide the international context, what happened, both at the macro and the micro level, which provided that what you experience now, that you are doing and that you're policy fellows. So you will see that what 20 years ago was really solely the realm of a professor and his and her, mainly his doctoral students and postdoc fellows, has now far more governmental interference, increasingly in the researcher education and training. So what has happened is the economic theory of the knowledge economy has really been embraced by governments all around the world. And so everybody in governmental positions and funding agencies believes innovation and technical changes are seen as a means of economic growth. And in the early days, the World Bank, OECD, and so on talked very much about it. And we do have some evidence of that, but not all that how governments really full-heartedly grab onto this. In this process of hoping for innovation and technical changes, that means economic growth and a better life for their nations, doctoral education and postdoctoral education and training really has to be seen as the place where innovators in a society can be prepared. And in that process, the knowledge which is created during the research must also be disseminated and communicated to society. So I will talk about, how publications become an issue, but also to really communicate well what happened and not stay in the ivory tower of a university. Specifically here at a technical university, at a science university, the ivory tower, as I see it, even here, are crumbling and it's opening up to society, and that's wonderful. However, simultaneously what happened, each government wanted always also a world-class research university and world-class research capacity to attract investment and to create new jobs. And of course, with this comes national status, including universities also like their status. So what has happened, government and the funding agency borrow from each other. And in whatever sociology jargon we call that isomorphism. So that means the National Science Foundation has something OECD, you find it in another country very similar. And so at the end, I will talk about what ramification that has. Well, what are the happens therefore at the macro level? Macro level means at the really national, like more the system-wide level. And micro level will be the department, the program down at a university. So in the big level, we see an enormous increase in PhD and postdocs. And I show you here just the number of PhD production. I got this from various US National Science Foundation indicators, science and engineering indicators. And you can see, I pointed out in India, it also just from 2004 to 2016, and we are not even up to 2020, 21. Of course, the biggest increase had been in China, but in countries also around the world. Now here I come, you as researchers, I'm specifically policy people, a big note, and I marked this asterisk with Russia. Now, what countries, national governments report to these national statistics, one really needs to read the fine print, what it is exactly they report. Because I was puzzled when I saw that NSF Science Indicator says in 2016, there are fewer PhD produced than there were in 2004 and 2014. Well, officially they report what we call in the US all but the dissertation. That means they did their classes and have all the requirements, but they did not have the dissertation completed. So the 2016 number is really the dissertation completed. Now let's go to the US. In the US, in this number, you have indeed, which the National Science Foundation uses, is different than those who are experts in looking up numbers. The survey of earned doctorate does not include medical degrees nor law degrees. They are doctorates, but they're not. But in this one, because Europe does and others doing, they are included. So please be aware when you compare numbers across, read the small ones and even produce better numbers. Okay, now I go back to what I said, we have an increase in PhDs and particularly around the world, more women. And I tried to find the number of women in India in the latest statistic, but it's so disaggregated that I couldn't show you one. So I just did one for the US. And since 2016, actually up till now, we have annually more women get a PhD than men, slightly more. However, of course, you can imagine it's not all in science and engineering fields, but like in biology, the percentage of women PhDs is equal or has even surpassed. Now we have another phenomenon. We have a lot more part-time people who get a doctorate. And by this, they're often older people. And this is like in India, you may know, since 2010, the Indian government required that everyone who teaches in a college or university needs to have a PhD. Now, people already worked, so they're now getting the doctorate on part-time. This actually is happening in most countries around the world. Africa, South Africa is a very good example. A lot of older part-time students who had no access during apartheid and so on. Now, what we also see, there are new types of doctorates there. There are professional doctorates. Traditionally, you had like a doctorate in education, but now you have a lot more doctorate in social work, professional, a doctorate in public health, and they're not PhDs, so they do a major dissertation, but it's more applied. It's not always original research. Now we have practice doctorates. This is particularly in Australia and the UK, but now it started since about 2000 also in the US. For example, you have a practice doctorate in nursing, or a practice doctorate in audiology, a practice doctorate in acupuncture, and so on. And you have industrial doctorates in collaboration. People work in industry, but do the doctorate with the university. Traditionally, actually, that was the first model like this was in Japan, and then they kind of had more the PhD, and now Germany and Europe coming back to the industrial doctorate. Now, we have another important phenomenon while the number of PhDs is going up. And I highlighted, we have a good number of so-called graying society.
Can you just explain a little bit more about the industrial doctoral?
The industrial doctorate?
Yeah.
More?
Yeah, just what you mentioned, just a little bit more, a couple of minutes if you can.
Okay, for example, in Germany, together with the Volkswagen Foundation, they fund some people, and they have people who get funding from the Volkswagen Foundation, but then maybe at the University, Technical University of Aachen, or at some Braunschweig, another technical university. They do the experiments, some in the industrial arena, but really get the training and oversight at the university. And I heard that now in France and I think in Portugal also there's something, I don't know there the specifics.
So the general term is used as industrial doctoral program, is it?
Yes, yes. And then one really needs to look what it means in each country.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was talking about next one, the graying societies. I said graying here, graying. Japan, has a lot fewer younger, the birth rate has really dropped. Same in UK, Australia, Scandinavian country, Germany, Austria. So these countries have in the last 15, some earlier, Australia earlier, really recruited heavily to get more international students, and have often changed their visa and immigration laws so they can stay afterwards and work. So literally through the back door was often a way of gaining entrance to a high, and hoping purposefully to get a very high skilled labor force while the own country doesn't have enough younger people. Now, we see also what I call here emerging nation. Now, that term is I don't like it so much, but it's often countries whose economy is really coming up. So they have like three possibilities they can do. Either they send their people abroad and fund them with governmental money to do the PhD abroad, like what Chile has done and Colombia. And I know I had some students from there, and they got the fellowship only when they were accepted in one of the 150 top world ranked universities. Then they got the full fellowship for whatever, 5 years, 6 years. You may know in the beginning, China also gave full fellowship. That's not anymore. Now they get only 1 year, and then they get the doctorate at home. And even the research they have done, and here I refer to the US, and I know it's probably in Europe and maybe in India the same. That's done with their Chinese supervisor and so on. Now we have these national fellowships, as I said, but we have overall an increase in funding of doctorate, because the people say either I would send them abroad or I attract international doctoral students, as Global North does, or I do both. I send them abroad, which often like Chile or Colombia does, and increase the number of PhD production in their own country, which is very much what India also does. And this is funded by different type of ministries, not just from higher education, but Ministry of Science and Technology, Ministry of whatever the country has there. And then comes these specific fellowships I just mentioned before, which in the case of China now is not anymore for a total doctorate. And I call that this is really the knowledge workers, how that is produced. Increasing the PhD number is also a way of being sure that more complete the doctorate. I don't know, I haven't seen any number about Indian PhD completion. Maybe it's high. When I started to do that in the US, and I did it in Berkeley, and Berkeley said, well, we are, you know, we have a good reputation, so let's make that public. And that was in 1991. We found that only about half of those who are enrolled in a doctorate actually complete. And then in the graduate school, we really went to work that this is changing. And that's how my research really come into being, because I was shocked that it's so high. And what we see now in countries, and I will give later a lot of more examples, governments have used monetary incentives. For every completed PhD, a South African university get extra money. In Australia, it's kind of prorated, they get it back. Similar in New Zealand. And I said with India, so it's more or less they need the completion, those who want to stay on the faculty. So you have also a higher completion rate, which adds up to more doctorate annually being awarded. Another big change is really the closer link from university to society. And this is, it's now not anymore just as it used to be, one professor, one discipline, one research group, one doctoral student. But now it's interdisciplinary, often applied projects with industry, with university, with hospitals. And you have around the world these kind, I called it the research triangle. You can think of Silicon Valley in Stanford, and here the industry, or you may think in Holland, for example, Wageningen, and they call themselves the agriculture Silicon Valley. Now, what you see, because as we said before, knowledge which is produced needs to be brought from the places where knowledge is produced out to society and used. The national governmental funding councils have now set up separate lines, not just for basic research, but for startups. Now in the US, NSF has a separate line just where PIs can apply for startups within the university. Germany, the German Research Council has something similar, France has it, and so on. Now, universities themselves, I think like here the IISc too, you have specific centers of Center for Commercialization. And so that is, universities have become an economic driver, and in countries, it depends how they're nationally or locally run and who gives the money. It's a source of income generating, although university found that patent doesn't bring many incomes, or not at all. A third phenomenon we see coming out of this globalization of ideas of the knowledge economy, we have, as I said, government borrows their ideas. So we have specific, and I call them flagship doctoral program, which actually all look very much alike. They are theme-oriented, they are interdisciplinary, and they are problem solving. And there are groups which have both doctoral students and postdocs, and often several countries. Now in the US, these were in former time the, now they're called the Integrated National Research Training Program. In Germany, they were in the Excellence Initiative. In Europe, there are the ITN, the Marie Curie Special research project. They're competitive, you need to apply, but several universities in Europe are together with one. And you could see a total rush when the UK left the EU, that British universities very fast tried to get a lot of those flagship programs together with other European universities to get access to the money. So this is developed the versatile researcher. So besides these flagship programs, which look similar, and I will talk later about what ramification that has, also we have around the world a lot of cooperative agreements, even joint on dual degrees, the coup d'etat on the doctoral program. I think what I want to point out, I was quite impressed how South Africa used these joint and dual degrees with countries of the global north in the process to train their own professors, if they're not at, not at Stellenbosch or not at the Cape Town University, but so they get training also in supervision and in certain research projects. So you not only expose your doctoral student and postdocs to other cultures, academic cultures in university, but in the process also a training of the professors happens. So this is, and the future researchers really learn how to work in international networks. And I named here a number of those networks. Here now the individual university, and I know here in India, it's the same. Universities want to be world-class universities, because then also the government incentivize them. But also once you have that status, that seems to attract very good students and staff. Now, as people in policy research, not only me in higher education, really look how this ranking is done and what are the criteria. And the ranking is a commercial enterprise, and they change slightly every year, so you have some news, otherwise you wouldn't have news. So please, you as really serious researcher, look at that and not just simply, oh, we are ranking so-and-so. But everybody does it. University presidents immediately go to ranking, and you see it on the website. My own university, you can go there and it's everybody talks about it and criticizes, but then on the website you have them. In light of all the changes, and specifically that people are more mobile and go to other countries and work with others and then afterwards be employed, more and more countries implemented accreditation agencies. That means to come up with an international quality standard, because both universities but future employer want to know that with that doctorate or the postdoc, what kind of qualities do the people bring with them? So I named, in Europe, it was the Bologna process. Portugal started very early in 2007. Luxembourg is one of the most recent one. And you may know in the US had actually quite early this accreditation agency, which are independent, they're not governmental agents. And the last one of these macro trends now in the last also 10 years, I said the other trends were kind of 20 years. Of course, country wants their researcher back home. So what kind of incentive do you have? And also, I think social scientists, cleverly say we are not anymore talking about brain drain, but we're talking about brain circulation. And it made to me lots of sense, this terminology, especially when I thought about the Indian context. Now, in Silicon Valley, actually many Indian scientists are employed and they go back and forth. So brain circulation, they may live there and then come here for a while and go back. And then in addition, India has a culture where family is very important. So try to be with their family in certain times. So it's really brain circulation. And I listed some what other countries do. I mean, Germany pays the postdocs to come back to an annual fair. Similarly, France, South Africa has established this it's kind of like endowed the National Academy professors, mainly people who were South African or were in the UK or somewhere in the world to come back. Now, China, as you may know, it's very difficult to get residency in the big major city in Shanghai or Beijing, and so bringing them back, that would be some of the incentive. I know also India has incentive, and I know for the very skilled Indian, which are also brought, there are too few of those fellowships. Now, on the micro level, now we go micro level. Remember, this is the department, the program, the individual postdoc and doctoral researcher in training. It's not anymore enough alone to have the traditional research competencies. That means critical thinking, knowing how to do research about research methodology, analyze data, know how to publish, but also work, I underlined it, in multidisciplinary teams. I on purpose didn't say interdisciplinary because often it's multi. We are not, I think maybe your generation is really interdisciplinary. We are more multi. And having a research ethic, so, and people we know around that data are not fabricated and so on. And what is now not surprising is more and more asked for. Remember about innovation and doctoral student and bringing more knowledge and economic growth. So now these new knowledge workers need to work in team. They need to really know how to present something complicated to an audience which is not dumb, but may not be specialist. So they really need to have excellent academic presenting skills, and that in a short time. Know how to write grant and know how to work in teams. And I think the science and engineering, most of them, they do know well how to do this effectively, but really managing people on budgets. And you know, at the postdoc level, you are in work in projects. So that's the time to really learn that. And there are now more and more professional competencies workshop out there for a day, for half a day, for more days. And that's why I'm saying use the time to get those skills and develop your career, and not just for the next year, but try to think how that might lead to a longer career path with a goal at the end. And of course, we come closer together, and yet I think around the world people have more fights. We need to learn really how to work with people from different backgrounds and do it well, and work with people from different cultures and understand about different cultures and religion and different perspective. Understand that Asian culture are more a high context culture, while German cultures or American are low context. We need to say everything. You observe the context and know, and Japan is a very extreme. But these competencies can be learned, and people do not need to immediately fall and learn through bad experience, as I did when I spent my first sabbatical in Japan. So altogether, I just summarize: more competency, more structured program, more professional competency. For the doctoral level, what is away from a single supervisor to more, or to even a committee, which really leads to more independence and leads to more independent researchers, and less burden actually on one person. So I'm very surprised by some of my older German colleagues, professors or Frau Professor, who kind of resist that. I said, but why? You have others that can help you. You don't know everything, but you know, there's a certain status. Now, English has become the language in most research university, and I say again, we have quite a trend around the world to nationalism, and not all universities, but how do we communicate otherwise? And I know here, for example, at IISc, while people come from India all over, north, south, west, and internationally from Africa, but it's in English. So I think, I know in India, language is a specific sensitive issue. And all around we see now more precise and transparent criteria for the admission to the doctorate, but also to the postdoctorate. And I mentioned in some universities around the world, then now you can immediately after the bachelor apply for the doctorate. And I said the different, I just repeat so you don't forget, different types of doctorates, but also efficiency has efficiency and accountability. There's a whole accountability movement. And Europe specifically is very keen that a doctorate should be only 3 years, but in reality it's 4 years, and the funding is like this. In the US, it's 5 years, 6 years, and so on. And the postdoc, 2 to 3, up to 5 years. And then in the US, we say then a person is not anymore a postdoc, otherwise it's exploitation. Career planning, this I must say has been really done well in the UK and many of the Scandinavian countries, who, while people were in the doctorate, started early on to develop with the student a roadmap. So what's happening? Ethics training, I already talked about it, and we see around the world more and more the introduction of a university-wide graduate school, more like not quite like in the US, but moving towards, which really assures the quality of doctoral and postdoctoral education, that not only the Department of Biochemistry is excellent, but also the Department of Management and so on. and there are some consistent basic standards, but then each department can have their own, but still there is a quality. And I heard that Indian universities have a graduate school, but I'm still not clear about really their function, but I will learn. Now I come to the challenges, and I'm here. We specifically, I thought it will be easier to focus when we focus on sustainable development goals. Now, what if we want that implement? Now, what do we have challenges? One is, and I mentioned all along, governmental and a lot more political interference in the researcher training. So this is very concretely what is funded and which discipline is supported. Then we have hand in hand with that a lot of numerical performance indicators. Only numerical, because that's easy to assess. So the increase of PhD production and the number of publications, but no thinking or very little thinking about adequate employment options afterwards. I think that's where government should really look. What happened with this Flagships program, I said that in Europe, each country has one, the US and Australia. Now you have a really stratification. You have a two-tier system. You have the very well-funded doctoral programs, international, interdisciplinary, and you have the many, and I call them run-of-the-mill doctoral program. What happened then within a department on the same bench, if you're in a bench science, you have those in the US, like who get one of these fancy, as we call it, NSF doctoral fellowship, or in Europe from the European Union. And next to you is another one who has just the local fellowship doing the same work. So we have created through this really more stratification, bifurcation, and a certain tension within even a program by differential funding. And differential, as you see in countries, also here in Chile, everywhere, in Colombia, if you have your PhD from a top 150 world-class university, counts more than when you have a doctorate from your own country. Other challenges is we had indeed before COVID quite some funding, and now COVID stopped a lot. So these temporary grant funding come, which a colleague of mine called, now we have ruins of innovations. And they're all hoping that after COVID, or we mentioned, we deal with it, these ruins will be built up again. Now, what of course me as a social scientist, but many scientists and engineers, I go back, concerns a lot. We have such unequal funding that because STEM fields had received more funding and more prestige, the social science and humanities and arts around the world received a lot less governmental funding. Instead, and I saw some exceptions in Japan now, for example, at Waseda, engineering really work with social science, humanities, and arts. I think we can really push together it forward and not pitch against certain disciplines against others. What is also, I think, a big tension, because university want world-class status, therefore they admit people who are top, rather than saying, I also want, but verbally it's said, equity, and I want, have access and so on. But then at the end, they don't do that, because having really a commitment to equity and also people can afford it, it would mean a bit more time, a bit more university infrastructure to help them get up to speed. And I found it very good in South Africa, where they have done people who seem to have good ability, but they're not there yet for a doctorate. South African University have established a year before, where they're really very intensively trained by professors who are with doctoral students to get to that level. So I think that's a university commitment one could implement. Now, I'm saying this only focusing on workforce preparedness. Well, what about curiosity-seeking attitude? Yes, we all need a job. We are not anymore in the 19th century where those who have a doctorate, have the money and can do research. But also curiosity need to be there, not just monetary. And that's why I said curiosity. What are the questions? Intellectual risk-taking. What do we want to know? And so use the time now. That's why I'm that governmental, I said monetary allocation, which is mostly used, really is into, I said, is just in indicators. And the result of this is a compliance behavior. And of course, departments and universities become very smart how to do that. South Africa is another good example, how they push their external reviewers to read their dissertation very fast so they can get the extra money, or a lot of money for publications. And I learned in China now, every doctorate needs to have 3 already publications. And then the department gets also money for it. And so that's why you have this a lot of predatory journals, but also it's not much new in the in the journal article. So we see there's always a good side and a bad side. What we also see with this enormous increase of PhDs around the world, we have more postdocs, specifically the European. They're very good. They're pushed what I call the PhD mountain all to the postdoc phase, and now fund postdocs, but what's afterwards? So we have in Europe many what we call split relationships. One is there, and what is afterwards? Because during postdoc time, that's at least the time where most people form more permanent relationships. And how do you go around with this? So what I'm saying is the way forward, and that I see that really great opportunity for you all is to develop now and internalize a sustainable mindset. And here I'm using the quote from Tristan McCowan. He's a professor at University of College London, and he defines it as the systemic approach to understanding what goes on beyond technical knowledge and understanding the basics of a healthy ecosystems and a thriving society. And of course, understanding the looming crisis in climate change. So that means breaking away from traditional management of disciplinary silos, but emphasizing also ethics, environmental studies, systems thinking, and self-awareness. Actually, I must say these were all things I saw here in the policy centers and in the various projects the postdocs are doing. And now you may ask, why do I specifically point out social justice? Now, I'm saying that researcher training, both at the not just doctoral level, but at the postdoctorate and in the postgraduate and postdoctoral training, is really the most advanced level of education an individual can achieve. So it's one of the arenas in which different types of knowledge are discovered and passed on to the next generation of scholars and so on, and knowledge is reinterpreted in the process. So this function gives researcher training a unique access to individuals and institutions in position of authority and in different nations around the world. Something is coming up here. Top stories, why is this coming here? Therefore, I say, and I should say not only doctoral education, but research training is really a field of power. How can I get rid of all this advertisement which creeped on my screen? Strange. Therefore, I say, and remember I said up front that only around the world 1.1% of population who have entered university. Oh my God, it's getting worse. Now I don't see anything anymore. Don't allow. Sorry, my screen went totally blank. What shall I do? But I
can still see your presentation.
Okay, but you still can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
And see your presentation as well. Please try to cancel whatever notifications are coming on your screen.
Okay, so I just have the last slide, then I can't do anything, I don't see anything. That I say, because of this really wonderful and special extra that specialty and also the kind of elite status we all have and possibilities, we have an extra responsibility to work towards democracy, inclusion, diversity, and equity. And that's what I call social justice. And something which is for you really not new, I want to end. Research is guided as much by national and local priorities, as I showed you, as well by the interest and the curiosity of the researchers themselves. And this means a commitment at all levels, at your department, your center, locally, but also carried on in your professional national meetings, nationally and internationally. So you have a wide range and a special responsibility to really add to a better society than what it is right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Nerad. Are you able to see the things on your system now?
No, I see nothing.
Okay, thank you, Professor Ravi. Thank you so much, Professor Maresi, for your insights on this topic. And I think this is very much essential for all of us fellows into this fellowship. So now moving on to the Q&A session, I would request all the participants in the meeting to raise their hands using the hand raise button, and they can ask their questions to Professor Maresi, and I'll call out the names accordingly. Alternatively, they can post their questions in the chat column, so that way I can also address the questions to Professor Maresi. So I would request the participants to raise their hands if they have any questions or anything to put forward.
I don't know how to go to chat, so you need to talk to me or you need to tell me.
Oh, yeah, okay. So first we have a hand raise by Professor Abhi. Over to you, Professor Abhi.
Yeah, hi Maresi. That was a really nice overview of the present state of doctoral education. My question is, as we learn more and more about what doctoral programs are supposed to accomplish, I get a sense that there is this mission creep. They are supposed to provide training in a large number of areas for the doctoral students. And I find that sort of concerning. But at the same time, one does realize that there is this need for the doctoral students to get trained in all those sort of nominally extracurricular or co-curricular skills, right? So what is the best way to handle this set of needs?
Yes. So therefore, I'm saying that was my last slide. Maybe I didn't come. That we really, I called it once. I borrowed from the Nigerian proverb. It takes a global village to educate a child. Right. I say it takes a global village to educate a researcher. Right. And that means it's on the one level, it's in the department, in the program. The other level would be indeed on the university, and that's why I think graduate schools are really excellent, because they're providing, if the department cannot provide all the workshops, and of course, you know, you couldn't, but some you can, specifically because you have specific ways of how you publish something in your area and who is the first author and who is the last author, very different in other areas. But a graduate school would be the one who does a lot and organize and pays a lot of these professional development competency workshops there. And then also increasingly the National Professional Association do this. And so it's both important that the supervisors allow, specifically that's for lab, bench science, doctorate, their students to go to those workshops. And they often say, no, they need to be in my lab, you know. Allow them to go, both what's offered on campus, but also by the professional association, and also provide money to go to international conference, because these are the three realms, that's why I talk about global village, where you learn international cultural exposure, different, you know, how to manage on budgets in workshops, but also work with others, that you communicate. Every discipline has their jargon and so on. So that is now increasingly done, and you have, maybe you're aware, in the UK, they're extremely active, and actually UK has a system where their funding agent, they give to the university money only when their doctoral students have taken a number of these workshops. And VTE is one of the organizations who does that, including the UK Council of Graduate Schools. They have their, and in the US, it's the graduate school, the local one, and what I said, the National Professional Association and so on.
Right. The training within the discipline is something that is taken care of by the department as well as the advisor, participation in conferences and so on. But the extra layer that we are talking about in terms of soft skills, intercultural engagement, and also, I mean, there is this strongly felt need across disciplines for learning about learning skills in statistical analysis involving various programming languages, and in some cases machine learning and artificial intelligence type approaches for studies cutting across disciplines. The parent department does not have any expertise, and so you are suggesting that something like a graduate school would help in organizing such programs, such workshops.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we don't have any of those here in India.
As I said, in the US, as you know, it's long established, and the graduate dean is a professor who is well accepted by the peers and therefore sits on the top administration team to also be an advocate for postdoc and doctoral students.
Right.
Now, Europe didn't go that route because it's specifically Germany, but they have, as you remember, I showed you once the manual, in University of Frankfurt has a grade, and they offer all this, and the university pays for the workshop. And they actually ask, because of people sign up and then don't come, so they ask like €5 for a workshop just to assure that they come.
Right.
Now, properly serious could talk about in Tübingen, they had this. Most universities in Germany have that now.
Right. Yeah. Great. I mean, the concept of graduate school does not exist in India. Most universities think of themselves as the graduate school cutting across different disciplines and so on. But this is something that is worth thinking about within the Indian context. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, that's why I would think one should give it different names, and Germany went for different names. For example, my own alma mater, because it's a technical university, that this unit calls itself Ingenium, from engineering, Ingenium. So the very creative name. In Bremen, it's called Bird. It's abbreviation. I mean, everybody very creative. So I think Indian University, you can create that too.
We are good at coming up with the acronyms. We will do that.
Thank you so much, Professor Abhi and Professor Maresi. Now I see hand raised by Suresh. So, Dr. Suresh, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Rohan. And I'm really sorry about earlier my internet repeatedly getting interrupted. I hope that won't happen again. So yes, it's really interesting, like the point you brought about the graduate school, and also like this I have seen also in many countries they have graduate schools which combine one university and one research center. For example, in case of Germany, you would combine Max Planck faculty with some faculties from the university, and there would be a joint graduate school that also kind of exists in these settings. Another thing that I wanted to maybe get your inputs on is in like what role that alumni can play in developing this kind of research culture further with both postdoc and PhD level. So some universities are very successful in leveraging their alumni network. They engage with them continuously. They also get a lot of funding from their alumni and so on. So what are maybe some of the best practices in this direction? What maybe in the Indian context we can do?
Here I come that I immediately, Abhi already smiles. I'm saying there are not such a thing as best practices, but only promising practices. Because when it's best, then you just take them and don't adapt it to your situation. Promising practices, it's like gravestone will be this. But I think it's wonderful that you bring this up. Thank you, because alumni can play a very important role. And too far, not just the funding, but really being invited and talking about how they went afterwards about their job. How did their career unfolded? What did they do? How did they combine family and career? And these, whatever, graduate schools, great academies, whatever they're called, we have many together with the campus career center. We have a whole day where we say it's a career day, and we invite, and I have always organized it, like a whole panel where men and women who are in a partnership talk about how they did this. And for example, I always said to my women doctoral students, before you commit or even marry, you have to decide that you don't make a decision. Those who earn the most, that's where we move to the town, but where both get something, because otherwise the women fall out. So, but this is alumni can really talk about how to deal with this. And you have different, you can have in NGOs or here in Bangalore, you have wonderful international companies, local companies. So invite them, and most people really do like to come because they remember how difficult it was for them. So that's one big role. The other one is, and that I learned again, actually from Germany, from the state of Hesse. All universities in that state, in the middle of Germany, they have specifically for women what they called a mentor program. And that mentor program is someone outside the university, which is there, and often two, because one mentor doesn't do it alone. But for women, they would have in whatever field someone in a company and someone there who is there, and the person can connect and can call of them. And out of this men organized by the university, by a special office, sometimes for women is the Frauenbeauftragte, the special office for women, so and so, which pays for that and organizes that. And they go out for dinner, they have events together, and they really become excellent friends, but also be introduced by them to a different labor market sphere, which they don't know. So these are alumni, and the university, this office then would call and write on alumni, would you mind coming? Could you imagine someone in science journalism, for example? We talked today about it. Would you mind mentoring someone of science policy fellows who are interested in writing? And Bangalore, you know, has, I think in Bangalore, you're so lucky, you have everything here. So this is how alumni can really help. Besides money, the administration can do that.
Thank you very much.
Has done well with the medical school. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Maresi, and thank you, Suresh, for asking your question. Now I move on to Radhika. Radhika, can you please unmute yourself and switch on your camera and ask your question to Professor Maresi?
Thanks, Rohan. Thanks, Professor Maresi. I'm not able to on my camera. I'm just commuting right now. But thank you, Professor Maresi, for bringing out the issues that are much needed at doctorate and at postdoctoral level. We need to have the specialized training, and especially we as a policy fellows, we need to understand, like, on a holistic level, what all policy level and STI oriented training we should have. Like, I am working in domain of public-private partnership, and I saw your point that you highlighted that research has to be taken to industry, but we have to move one step forward. We have to take it to the local level or an end user community as well. So this, we propose this idea of having a dedicated training or a course module for the scholars in this particular field who are working, and in fact the professionals who are working in the ministries and in the academic settings, to have an industry academia licensing course where they will understand how the both academic unit and the industry unit has to license together. Or on a much broader level, we can say how we have to undertake public-private partnership in this country, where we do not know what are the set guidelines, we do not know what is the financial model that we have to take up. So the need, definitely we all talk about in workshops and in seminars, that there is need to build PPP in India, there is need to build industry academia linkages. But the awareness level to have such dedicated training courses is very, sorry, Professor Maresi. Yeah. So my question is that we understand that there is a need to build a capacity in particular domain. We need to introduce such kind of specialized doctorate courses and specialized training. But the awareness among the people who are going to fund those programs or who are going to execute or implement those programs is very limited. So I just want to take your advice and suggestion how we should proceed in this scenario. If we need to introduce something that is very much required in this country, but we do not have a kind of a facilitated support mechanism for that, how we bring that push for introducing such new modules and new courses. Yeah, thank you. Over to you, Professor.
Yes, my suggestion would be right now, having read very carefully your National Education Policy 2020, which talks about leadership and leadership training. And I would really say that this is a time where for the part at the government, but also at top university, could really engage in leadership training. And and this is happening all around the world. I mean, I'm also engaged in educational leadership training, but coaching of top people in leadership position in government and organization has become actually quite common now. I'm quite surprised. So this is something I would point to your national policies and say, here, you talk about it, and it's wonderful rhetoric. Now it needs to be implemented. It's toward the end of the higher education section on leadership. And another thing I want to point out, Indian professors might be surprised, but in Australia and in New Zealand and in some UK universities, professors who supervise doctoral students have to take an exam and have to take a workshop, because no one has been trained to be a good supervisor, and it takes, as you see now, more skill, more understanding beyond just that one complicated research project. And so that is now more and more the case in other countries. And I would also suggest that I know, for example, in Australia, it was the Australian doctoral student and postdocs unionized and pushed through that policy that professors need to take a workshop and an exam to be a supervisor for doctoral students.
Thanks, Professor Maresi, for your. Thank you.
Thank you, Radhika. Thank you, Professor Maresi. Now we'll move to the next person for the question. I'd invite Jonathan, if you could unmute yourself and come forward.
Yeah. Hello, Professor. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I don't see you, but I can hear you.
Okay. Now, can you see me?
Yes, good.
Yes, okay. Given the size of funding available for R&D in India for higher education institutions, when we compare with other countries, it's very minuscule. And I feel that government has a only stopgap arrangement, that is a short-term strategy, but I don't see a long-term strategy from the government. And I would like to know what short-term and long-term policies and strategies that government should have. And also it same applies for the educational institutes in stimulating government fundings.
Now I can't hear you anymore.
You can't hear me?
Now again, yeah.
Okay. Given the size of a percentage of GDP expenditure on research and development in India, when we compare to other developing and emerging markets, it's quite less. So the government, what I feel that it has a stopgap arrangement or short-term policy measures, which doesn't give required societal benefits in long term. So what long-term and short-term strategies that government should have in enhancing the quality of research and training?
So you asked me what would I suggest that the government has, what strategies government should have short-term and long-term?
Yes, yes.
Well, yes, I mean, you pointed, I mean, there is indeed also more money into the higher education sector. I mean, that is since decades in India the case that needed to be. But since the Indian government is so keen on also innovation and economic growth, which has really happened in some way, it can allow and shall give money for the training for top administrators in their universities to exactly do what I said. It's money, but it's also training people and exposing them what has tried in other countries and what worked and understanding why, and what didn't work and understanding why it didn't work. So I think there are, beyond money, also the various agencies come together and inform themselves what's actually out there already on knowledge, and not start again from zero.
Okay. Okay, Professor.
Thank you, Janathan. Thank you, Professor Maresi. Now, moving forward, I'll request Ajinkya and Gautam, if you could have your questions short. So now, Ajinkya, you can come first and ask your question to Professor Maresi.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Professor Maresi, for the excellent talk. You mentioned about training doctoral and postdoc students for their jobs, for their next careers. So that is from I understand that it is necessary from the side of supplying training a workforce, but thinking from the other side, supply of jobs for PhDs and postdocs. Do you think that the research funding and doctoral programs should expand only to an extent and only with a pace, so that all the PhD students can find academic jobs? And if not, how can policymakers and academic institutions ensure that there are non-academic jobs available for those PhD students?
Very good question. Excellent. This has been really my, and not just me alone, but many of people in my field, the goal in the last nearly 30 years, why I started, as Abhi said, to do a career path analysis, because there was very little known what has happened. But it needs also, and we could see that and that can be coordinated somewhat, that when you increase on the one side the PhD, that the labor markets, and the PhD is not just for academic at all. I mean, in India, you may have still a need, but as you know, in the US and others, there's none. The majority of people go to other fields, industry, business, governments, NGOs, but there need to be, and that can be coordinated, an understanding what skills the people bring, and that's how so much the professional skill development level came into PhD. And I know Abhi called it mission creep a little bit, but it is exactly for jobs, non-academic jobs. And that is what before was asked about alumni. That's really where they can come in and help and say how they got, you can bring in alumni who are in companies, but also working with career centers, with local companies, R&Ds, but also other companies and seeing that people have a postdoc or a doctorate have a lot of skills. I mean, a good example, as you know, is, for example, Microsoft in Seattle. Many people are there PhDs. I mean, I have many friends who have a PhD in linguistic and were specialized in African languages. They developed and were manager for that part when Microsoft moved in different countries. So it needs to be a work together, and I think economists and others can really work together. And I give you an example. I mean, it's Chile. It's a small country, but Chile has given all this money which it had in surplus in foreign currency from the copper export and put it into fellowship for PhDs. Now the already third cohort of PhDs coming back, but universities, you know, there are only so many open in a certain field. What to do? And companies said, why do we need to hire PhDs? We never needed that. So now what the government sees, they need to work more with the sector, but interestingly, a group of open-minded economists, which Chile, as you may know, was a certain economy, a certain history, working really together with various sectors and informing also what people with that higher education can bring to it. That one can and need people now in various business and companies with that well-rounded skills, and therefore PhDs cannot be that narrow-minded person as before, but someone who can present well, someone who has an understanding about the world. And that's where I think governments, when someone asked before about long and short term, and in between non-governmental agencies can work together. I can give you an example. When I started understanding how it is, I went to Boeing. You know, the University of Washington, of course, had in aerospace, and Boeing is one of the big companies. So I wanted to understand how they're going about, who do they hire, how many PhD do they hire. At that time, they hired a lot of PhDs from political science. I said, why? Oh, we do a lot of risk analysis because the Soviet Union fell apart. Is it risky if we have companies in Eastern European? We know Eastern European are very well trained in science, but you know, politically we don't know. So companies have all kinds of different needs. And I think that understanding that we now educate people broader needs to be brought to various companies and various work sectors.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Achinkya. Thank you, Professor Maresi. So we are moving towards the last question of this webinar. Gautam, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question to Professor Maresi?
Yeah, thanks, Rohan. Thanks, Professor Maresi. So my question is also related to the academia society connect that you mentioned in your presentation. So in India, while many PhD researchers do work on topics which have societal concerns, but very few of them communicate the research findings back to the general public. So in India, the minimum criteria for obtaining a PhD is like 1 research paper and 2 conference presentations, apart from a dissertation, of course. So should there be, do you recommend that PhD researchers should also be asked to communicate the research findings in a non-jargonish, non-technical language in regional languages back to the society so that they can also know what they have done? Thank you.
Thank you for asking that. Just before I was talking, my first time I was here in the center. I think it was a day-long workshop for doctoral students where I said it's not enough anymore that you only write your dissertation, but we did this so-called elevator talk. And the idea is you are in the elevator and you realize, my God, someone asked me what I'm doing. And this is someone from a funding agency, and they may fund me afterwards. I have till the whatever 9th floor in the elevator and need to explain to the person who is not an expert in whatever science or so, what I'm doing and why is it important, what societal relevance it has. So I would say, and I would personally even say, and in the US NSF Ask now, you always need to specify what is the societal relevance. That each dissertation should have at the end maybe a page where they explain what they have done, what's the societal relevance. And in addition, as you said, should learn, that's why this professional competencies workshop, learn to communicate complicated phenomenon, but in a way that someone who's not dumb, but not an expert can understand it. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Over to you, Rohan.
Thank you, Gautam. Thank you, Professor Maresi. So before we, I go for a vote of thanks and end this lectures for today, I would request all the participants in the meet to kindly switch on their cameras so we can have a group photograph. Suresh, are you there for the photograph?
Rohan.
Okay.
1 second.
Lovely.
Yeah, it is done, Rohan.
Okay, thank you so much, Suresh. Thank you, Professor Maresi, for addressing all of us on this very crucial topic. And what all the fellows must have gained, what I personally gained is like following the interdisciplinary research, which is the need of the hour, how social justice and ethical practices is the need, which needs to be complemented with all those efforts. So I thank you and all the participants joining us on behalf of DST, CPR, IISc Bangalore. And we also request everyone to be the part of this community and join us in other set of lectures in future coming forward, which is a part of our policy lecture series. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.